Hello everybody, it's Rob here at Trinity Streetsville, and here at Trinity we're a group of ordinary people learning to follow Jesus in our own time. And today we're going to be looking at some very famous words of Jesus. Ask and you will receive, seek and you will find. You've heard this before, but what does it mean? Do we really get all that we ask for? And if we do, aren't we going to become like spoiled children? Well, it's exactly the opposite, that Jesus is trying to teach us not to be self-centered, but to be centered on others, those around us. So stick around and I'll explain what I mean. So if you are a Harry Potter fan, you will know that that was Harry's cousin, Dudley Dursley. And Dudley is the spoiled child of Vernon and Petunia Dursley. And Dudley there is the perfect storm of three really toxic traits going on. First, he's self-centered. Dudley thinks that the whole world revolves around him to cater to his every whim. Secondly, he is entitled. All those presents he got, they weren't really gifts because he felt like he was owed them. The world owes him. He's entitled. And thirdly, he's shallow. His relationships have become merely transactional, right? His parents just give him things to keep him happy, not necessarily because they love him. And his parents, the reason he has parents, according to him, is basically to supply for his needs. So there's no real depth in his relationship. He's self-centered, he's entitled, and he's shallow. Now, even though Dudley is a fictional character, unfortunately, he's a real reflection of a lot that goes on in our own culture and society today. We've seen parents like that from time to time, and let's be honest, we've been parents like this from time to time, spoiling our kids, maybe spoiling them rotten even. And like Dudley, what happens is when parents constantly say yes to their children, they too end up creating these self-centered little monsters who believe that the world exists just to satisfy their desires. In fact, research shows that overly indulgent parenting actually correlates strongly with narcissism in children later in life. And like Dudley, many children today, they also feel entitled. They believe life owes them. They won't accept a no. They're very impatient. They're frustrated easily. Those are all signs of entitlement. And thirdly, like Dudley, this kind of parenting style can lead to shallow relationships that are more based on, hey, what have you done for me lately, rather than relationships based on love and affection. And again, some studies actually link highly permissive parenting with low emotional intelligence in children later on in life. It's just harder for spoiled kids to sustain meaningful, deep, and affectionate relationships. So the research is clear, right? Dudley isn't just a fictional exaggeration. But he's a reflection of something that's dangerously real in society today. And here's where things get a little bit uncomfortable and closer to home. Because here's the thing. If a parent who always says yes to his or her child can form them into self-centered, entitled, and shallow creatures, then what happens when that's our view of God? That God exists primarily to always say yes to our prayers and to indulge in everything that we ask him. I call it Dudley discipleship, right? And it arises when we believe that God is always there to say yes to what we ask for and give us everything. And therefore, the same kind of stuff ends up happening spiritually in our lives, too. It leads to self-centered prayers. Our prayer life becomes all about our personal wish list. We don't really pray, Lord, thy kingdom come. What we're praying is, may my kingdom come, right? And it also leads to an entitled kind of spirituality, a spirituality where we say that we deserve constant blessings from God, and if they don't come, then we're very, very resentful. And it leads to a shallow relationship with God. I mean, when God is just there to dispense gifts to us, then our relationship with him is just paper thin. God's a tool for our desires rather than the treasure of our heart. There's no intimacy. There's no depth there. And so here is the danger. The danger is when a bunch of self-centered and entitled and shallow Christians get together into a church and this takes root, it actually screws up the mission that God gave us, which was actually to be people who are marked by self-giving love and who sacrifice their own wants and needs for the sake of others and for the sake of the world and for the sake of the kingdom. Like Paul, what we end up actually becoming are lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Sounds like Dudley. Sounds like me, if I'm honest. It sounds like you too, probably, if you're honest. The question we have to ask this morning, where does this self-centeredness come from? Where does this entitlement, where does this shallow spirituality arise from? And I'm sorry to say that I think a lot of it comes from a misreading of a very famous part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. We've been going through Jesus' most famous teaching, the Sermon on the Mount. It's found in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. And we have already gone through chapter 5. We've already gone through chapter 6. And today we break into chapter 7. Now I should say, you'll notice we didn't cover chapter 7 verses 1 to 6. And the reason is because that whole bit, which was about not judging others, is something I already preached on back on June 1st. So if you want to access that, you can go to our YouTube channel and you can dig that up. But today what we're really arriving at is Matthew 7, 7 to 12, which Sally just read for us, where it sounds a lot like Jesus is pulling an Aunt Petunia and an Uncle Vernon. Ask and it'll be given to you. Seek and you'll find. Oh, knock and the door will be open for you. Whoever asks gets, and whoever seeks finds, and whoever knocks, the doors will be open to you. I mean, doesn't that sound like God is teaching us to be self-centered, entitled, and shallow? Oh, Rob, whatever you want, you can have it. Oh, little dudders, here. Do you want more? Have another present. Have another present. You want 39, 30, 40 presents? Seek, and I'll give it to you. Ask, and you'll have it. Knock, and the door will be open to you. Is that enough? Is God trying to raise us the way the Dursleys raised Dudley? Giving us everything we want? Making us into self-centered, entitled, and shallow Christians? Is that what he's saying here? It might look like it, but actually couldn't be further from the truth. No way. If we take a closer look at what this passage is really saying, we will see that Jesus is trying to teach us a way better method of prayer, and that God is actually trying to raise us, his children, in a way better manner of life. Okay, so I want to invite you just to follow along. There are some sermon notes that we've handed out on your way in, and if you're joining us online, you can access the sermon notes online by visiting our church app, which is called Church Center. So let's get started. Here's the first thing I want to say. When Jesus says, ask and seek and knock, it's easy to rip those verses out of context and to imagine that God is saying, hey, whatever you want, I'll give it to you. But if we actually read the context, we will realize that that's not true. That in context, Jesus is not speaking about every kind of prayer that you pray, I will answer and give to you. But he's talking about a very specific kind of prayer. Not a self-centered prayer, a prayer for me. It's about other-centered prayers. That's what he's promising to answer. But to see that, you've got to look at the context. Here's what I mean. Just before Jesus speaks these words, what is he talking about? He's talking about how we judge others. He's talking about hypocrisy. He's talking about the need for us to remove the plank from our own eye before we try to pick the speck out of somebody else's eye. In other words, what's he talking about? He's talking about making peace with others. He's talking about restoring relationships. He's talking about forgiveness. That is the context of ask, seek, knock. It's about relationships. And then afterwards, what is Jesus talking about? Oh, guess what? He's also talking about relationships. This is where he gives us the golden rule, do to others what you would have them do to you. That is not a verse about me getting my own way. It's a verse about loving others the way that we want to be loved. So that's the context after. So follow with me here. Right before Jesus says, ask and seek and knock, he's talking all about restoring relationships. And right after Jesus says, ask and seek and knock, he's talking all about loving others and again, relationships. Which means that the prayer that Jesus promises to answer in Matthew 7, 7 and 8 are prayers for relationships. It's a certain type of prayer, a kind of prayer where we're asking God to help us love other people well. If you have ever had to mend a broken relationship, then you'll know exactly what I mean. It is hard. You cannot do that on your own. You need wisdom. And Jesus is saying, ask me, and I'll give you that wisdom. Seek me out. Knock on the door. I'll teach you the wisdom. I'll give you the courage to restore that relationship. I'll give you the patience and the grace to forgive that person. Come to me and ask. So I'm going to say it again. Jesus is not promising us anything we want in these prayers. But in context, what he's really offering us is wisdom for healing relationships. Okay? Leon Morris, who's a commentator, he agrees. He says, the request Jesus speaks of here is not a carte blanche for selfish desires. The prayer arises from the preceding teaching, like we said, wisdom to live righteously, grace to forgive, and the courage to reconcile. And then again, Craig Blomberg talks about the verses that come right after. He says, the linking of verses 7 and 8 with the golden rule suggests strongly that what we're to request from God is whatever will enable us to treat others as we would want to be treated. Therefore, the emphasis is on ethical and the relational, not the material. I am so sorry this morning if you thought that this reading we just read was teaching us to pray for a Ferrari or pray for a bigger house or that God would give us a lifetime supply of chocolate if that's what we wanted. No. When Jesus says ask, he is not saying ask for Raptors seasons tickets. When Jesus says seek, he is not saying seek for a new iPhone. When Jesus says knock, he's not saying, knock on the door of an all-inclusive resort in Maui. No. This is a certain kind of prayer where Jesus is inviting us to pray for help to heal our relationships. So therefore, Jesus is saying, I will help you when you pray prayers like this. And I've left these blank. You can fill them in however you want. But when you pray a prayer like this, Jesus says, I will help you. Lord, help me to forgive my spouse. Jesus says, yes, I will help you with that. Father, give me the courage to apologize to that, fill it in, coworker. God, show me how to love that family member or that person at coffee hour who's really, really annoying. I know it's not what we wanted to hear. We thought that God was offering to give us anything. That's not what the context shows us. And it's actually a good thing because we don't want to grow up to be Dudley disciples. Okay? So that brings us to the second misunderstanding. The first misunderstanding is this is about relationships, not about material things. The second misunderstanding that we need to work out is these ask, seek, and knock prayers make it sound like God is this emergency responder. That normally in life we're going along just fine, thank you very much, I can handle life myself. But if we need something, God says, if you run into trouble, ask me, I'll be there. If you run into a bind, seek me out. If you have a real problem, just knock on the door and I'll sort you out. And then you can be on your merry way again in your life. I'm just there if you need it. But a closer look at what Jesus is teaching us to pray here actually shows us he isn't encouraging us to pray these entitled one and done kind of prayers. He's teaching us to rely on him through prayer in this ongoing way. Here's what I mean. When commentators look at what Matthew 7 to 11 is really saying, many suggest that the best way to read it, given the tense of the verbs, is keep asking. Keep seeking, keep knocking. The verbs in Greek are in the present tense, the imperative mood, and the active voice, which apparently expresses an action that is ongoing and it's continual rather than a one-time event. So you see what this means is God wants you to be relying on him through prayer all day. Every day, not just when the going gets tough. Entitled people say, you know what, God owes me. But when we develop the spirit of reliance, we actually come to say, no, God cares for me each and every day. Entitled people say, I deserve this. But people who are reliant on God day in and day out say, no, I need him always. Entitlement is about getting, but reliance is about staying in a relationship with God. Not to make us spoiled, but to keep us close. Again, Leon Morris says, prayer is not an attempt to force God's hand, but it's a humble acknowledgement of our continual dependence on him. Dudley, he had this once a year windfall, his birthday, right? And if you see God only that way, as this guy who shows up to hand you gifts on special occasions, your relationship will always have that sense of entitlement. But when you keep coming back to him, keep relying on him day by day, moment by moment, that's when you move from a birthday relationship with God to an everyday relationship with God. I mean, think about Israel when they were in the wilderness. When Israel was in the wilderness, could God have whipped up a Costco-sized pallet of food and given them food for a whole week? Yes, but he didn't. He gave them bread day by day. And why was that? It was so they would keep coming back in reliance on him. Or consider what Jesus said in John chapter 15. He says, apart from me, you can do nothing. Now, that's not a statement about the occasional need for emergency help. It's a reminder that our very life, all of our life, flows from an ongoing connection to God. I probably should have done this a lot earlier, but now that we've got more drivers in our house, I went in for the family-sized CAA membership, just in case anyone, whether it's Sophie or Petra or me or Sal, need some roadside assistance. That is often how we treat God, roadside assistance. We're fine cruising along until something breaks down and then we just dial in a quick fix. But Jesus isn't offering us CAA for the soul. He's inviting us into a relationship where we don't just call him when we've got a flat. We invite him into the car for the whole trip. Okay. That brings us to the third and final thing I want to share with you today about how we sometimes misunderstand this command about prayer. At first glance, Jesus seems to be describing this very shallow relationship with God as if God's this heavenly ATM. Insert your prayer, get your blessing. Insert your coin, get your result, right? But upon closer inspection, praying the way that Jesus is teaching us does not result in a shallow relationship, but actually one of the most intimate relationships possible, the relationship between a parent and a child. Listen to what Jesus says. He says, which of you, if your son, this is parent-child language, asks you for bread, we'll give him a stone. Or if he asks for a fish, we'll give him a snake. If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? Now notice the shift, right? Jesus does not say God gives. He says your Father gives. Prayer isn't about a shallow transaction. It's developing a relationship of intimacy with your Heavenly Father. That's the result Jesus is after. Good parenting doesn't just result in kids who believe that their parents can meet all their needs. Good parenting results in kids who know they're loved and who love their parents. You can't love a vending machine, but you can love a father, and a father can love you. And Jesus wants us to develop that kind of intimacy in our prayer lives, which helps us to know God as our Father, who will give us what we need, even if it's not what we want. And that's actually really important. I put this quote from Dallas Willard actually into your notes because I think it's really important. The idea that God would automatically give us whatever we want is not the mark of a loving father, but of a careless stranger. Do you get that? Like, the very fact that we don't get what we ask for is a sign that we are relating to a person, not a machine. When God says no, or when God says not yet, it's actually a sign of love. Right? We don't always know what's good or bad for us, but our Father does. A toddler might ask for candy for breakfast every single day, but a good parent won't say yes, not because they don't love them, but precisely because they do love them. What Dudley needed most in Harry Potter wasn't more yeses. He actually needed more no's or not yet. He didn't need more gifts. He needed more love, more care, and more intimacy with his parents. They kept handing him snakes and rocks and gifts that weren't good for him and actually hurt him in the long run, right? But a good father doesn't just give you what you want in the moment. He gives you those things that are going to grow you up into the person you were made to be. And that's how we should pray too. Because when we approach God as a father, then prayer actually becomes less about getting stuff from God and more about getting God himself. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be open to you. If we misunderstand Jesus' words, we'll become spiritual Dudleys or spiritual duds. Right? Our arms are loaded with presents, but we're never satisfied, self-centered, entitled, and shallow. But that's not what Jesus is teaching us here. Now we've seen Jesus doesn't want to make us spiritual Dudleys. He wants to move us from being self-centered to other-centered, repairing relationships, living out the golden rule. He wants us to move from entitlement to reliance, making prayer the posture of our life every day and all day. And he wants to move us from a shallow relationship with God as a vending machine to a deep, intimate relationship with God is our Father who gives us what is best, even if it's not what we expect. Friends, how are you approaching God these days? Are you approaching God like Dudley or like a disciple? A Dudley comes to God demanding, but a disciple comes to God depending. Dudley wants gifts, but a disciple wants the giver. Dudley wants more stuff from God, but a disciple wants more of God himself. And so this week, I just want to encourage you to renew your own prayer lives in this way. And as you're praying this week, ask yourself, am I praying to get something from God, or am I praying to get close to God? And then take Jesus at his word. Keep asking, keep seeking, and keep knocking. Not because Jesus or God is stingy or hard of hearing, but because he loves you and because he's shaping you into someone who can love others like he does. So thanks be to God. Amen.